Hello friends, I am here with you to speak about the poem Dejection, an Ode written by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Samuel Taylor Coleridge, or S.T. Coleridge, as you know, is one among the early Romantic poets. He was born in 1772 and died in 1834. He was a great friend of William Wordsworth, and together they brought out the Lyrical Ballads, which is considered to be a seminal work as far as the Romantic movement of poetry is concerned. He also shared volumes and collaborated with Charles Lamb, Robert Southey and Charles Lloyd. He wrote very famous poems like Kubla Khan, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, Christabel, and he also was a renowned critic who spoke about the concepts of primary imagination, secondary imagination and fancy. And throughout his life he used to have bouts of anxiety and depression. He had a lot of physical ailments that tormented him throughout, and he had to continuous medication including laudanum, which fostered an addiction towards opium. And Kubla Khan, those who have read the poem Kubla Khan know that the two sections of the poem seem quite disconnected, and it is attributed to the influence of opium which he had taken at that time. This poem, Dejection, an Ode, written by Samuel Coleridge, is considered to be one among the most popular odes in English literature. It was written in 1802 and was published for the first time in London's Morning Post newspaper in 1802. The poem consists of 8 stanzas, and there is also a few lines from the ballad of Sir Patrick Spens given at the beginning of the poem. So here he talks about, as the title tells us, dejection. And Samuel Taylor Coleridge, as mentioned earlier, went through recurring bouts of unhappiness and despair, and he also experienced what we would now call a writer's block, and he was afraid that he had lost his poetic inspiration. And this particular poem is a result of the anxiety and the fear that he has lost his poetic talent. And here you see how worried the man, because we, as far as we know, a poet cannot live without imagination. A poet needs to be alive and alert to things happening around him. But Coleridge laments about a kind of a numbness that has taken over him and his inability to react to things happening around him. So let us now read the poem and share the anguish of this tormented soul. So as I said earlier, the poem begins with 4 lines taken from the ballad of Sir Patrick Spens. Let me just read those lines. Late, late yestreen I saw a new moon, with the old moon in her arms. And I fear, my master dear, we shall have a deadly storm. Now these lines tell us about a very strange phenomenon. A new moon with the old moon in her arms. I wonder whether any of you have seen this. This occasionally does happen when you have a moon waning and a new moon coming. You would find the remnants of the old moon, and you would see the full moon, and at the bottom of the full moon you at least would feel that you can see the remnants, the remaining thin line of the moon. And that is what is mentioned here as the new moon with the old moon in her arms. And this, it was believed, was a kind of a portent of a storm. When people saw the new moon with the old moon in her arms, people those days used to say that very soon there is going to be a terrible storm, and that's exactly what is said here too. So Coleridge chooses to open his poem on dejection with these lines. Now let us see what significance these lines have in the poem. Now I am going on to stanza 1. Well, if the bard was weatherwise, who made the grand old ballad of Sir Patrick Spens, this night so tranquil now will not go hence unroused by winds that ply a busier trade than those which mound yon cloud in lazy flakes, or the dull sobbing draught that moans and rakes upon the strings of this Aeolian lute, which better far were mute. It's a long stanza. I'm not reading the whole stanza now. So he says, he just recollects these lines which we read earlier, the lines of the ballad. So the first, so he begins the stanza by saying, well, if the bard was weatherwise. Now who is the bard? Bard is the poet, and here specifically it is the poet who wrote the ballad of Sir Patrick Spens. So he says, if that poet was weatherwise, that is, if he is really knowledgeable about weather, who made the grand old ballad of Sir Patrick Spens, this night so tranquil now will not go hence. So he says that this particular night, which is very, very tranquil and serene now, there is not a trace of a storm or a rain or thunder, but he has already seen the moon outside with the same moon, that is the new moon, with the old moon in her lap, and that is why he says, if what that poet said is really true, then this night, which is very quiet now, is soon going to be noisy. Will not go hence unroused by winds means it will soon be roused by winds that ply a busier trade. So now the winds, they are doing something else, but they will soon be very busy. Than ply a busier trade than those which mold yon cloud. So now what are the winds doing? The winds are just lazing around and they are molding the cloud in lazy flakes. So sometimes in the blue sky you might have seen flakes of the cloud. You know that there are different types of clouds. There are the huge ones that kind of cluster in big bunches like cotton bundles, and you also have the other kind of cloud where you have loose flakes just flitting about the sky, just skimming around slowly. So then he says, now the wind has nothing to do, and so the wind is playing around with the lazy flakes, molding yon cloud in lazy flakes, or the dull sobbing draught. Draught again is just a whiff of wind or a gentle wind. And what is that the wind doing? There is a lute there. Lute is a musical instrument, the Aeolian lute. There is this musical instrument there, and he says that the wind, because it has nothing else to do, it is passing in and out of this lute, and you can hear the music of the strings when the wind passes through the strings. I mean, that is not actually possible. Now we know that a wind chime which you hang on the ceiling or near the window, so that every time the wind passes by, the chiming sound is heard. There it's possible, but I really wonder whether an Aeolian lute can play music when wind just passes through randomly. But anyway, that's what the poet chooses to say. So the wind is it's a dull sobbing draught that moans and rakes upon the strings of the Aeolian lute, which far better were mute. So he is quite irritated by that sound. He would prefer the wind to be quiet. Why does he say that the wind is going to be busy soon? He gives us the reason. For lo, the new moon, winter bright, and overspread with phantom light, with swimming phantom light overspread, but rimmed and circled by a silver thread. I see the old moon in her lap, foretelling the coming on of rain and squally blast. So this is the reason why he told us that there might be a storm very soon, because when he looks out up at the sky, he can see the new moon, that is winter bright, and there is a phantom light around the moon. Sometimes you see it that way. The moon, it is surrounded by a big circle of phantom light, eerie kind of light, and there is swimming phantom light overspread but rimmed with and circled by a silver thread. So he feels that he can see a silver outline around this light, and he can see the moon. And so he tells us that since I see this, according to the ballad of Sir Patrick Spens, foretells the coming on of rain and a squally blast. So squally blast only means rain and lightning and noisy thunder. And oh, that even now the gust was swelling, and the slant night shower driving loud and fast. Those sounds which oft have raised me, whilst they awed and send my soul abroad, might now perhaps their wonted impulse give, might startle this dull pain and make it move and alive. So he hopes that the wind and the rain comes fast. And oh, that even now the gusts were swelling. So he hopes that, I wish that the gust or the wind starts swelling now, and the slant night shower, the slanting rain shower driving loud and fast. And these sounds, he says, earlier, some time back, they used to awe me, they used to take me by wonder and send my soul abroad. Means they used to induce all kinds of thoughts in his mind. Might now perhaps their wonted impulse give, might startle this dull pain and make it move and live. And he says, now in my soul there is just this dull pain, nothing else is happening in my soul, and I only hope that the noise of this rain and storm would startle this pain and make it move. So let something happen that will remove this pain from my mind and make my soul move and come alive again. So that is how he begins the poem. So we understand that the poet is not exactly in a very happy mood, because he says that his soul is numbed by a dull pain, and he is hoping that the soon to arrive rain and the accompanying thunder and lightning will somehow arouse him and make him live again. So that was stanza 1. Now let's go on to stanza 2. A grief without a pang, void, dark and drear, a stifled, drowsy, unimpassioned grief, which finds no natural outlet nor relief in word or sigh or tear. O lady, in this wan and heartless mood, to other thoughts by yonder throstle wood, all this long eve, so balmy and serene, have I been gazing on the western sky and its peculiar tint of yellow-green. And still I gaze, and still I gaze, and with how blank an eye, and those thin clouds above, in flakes and bars, that give away their motion to the stars, those stars that glide behind them or between, now sparkling, now bedimmed, but always seen. Yon crescent moon, as fixed as if it grew in its own cloudless, starless lake of blue. I see them all so excellently fair. I see, not feel, how beautiful they are. So he tries to tell us about this feeling in his heart or in his soul. He says, a grief without a pang. He says, I feel a grief, but then it doesn't have a pang, or it doesn't have any, there is no particular impact that this grief is making on me. It's just a grief. It's been there for quite some time now. It is void, it's kind of empty, it is dark, it is drear. It is a stifled, drowsy, unimpassioned grief. Stifled in the sense he feels suffocated by this grief. Something that is suppressed is what you would say, it is stifled. So he says, I don't know the cause of my grief. I only feel this grief, but it is unimpassioned in the sense that I don't feel the need to vent this grief. I don't feel like I want to cry, or that I want to shout, or I want to talk to anybody. it's just there like a burden over my heart. That is why it's unimpassioned grief. When grief is if it is a grief of passion, you would somehow maybe you would throw tantrums, or maybe you would cry, or maybe you would shout at somebody. But he says, I don't feel like doing any of those things. It's a grief without a pang, and it finds no natural outlet. There is no relief for this grief, because it doesn't come out at all in a word or in a sigh or as tears, nothing. It's just there like a piece of rock inside my soul. It's just there, and it's making me so unhappy. And then he says, oh lady, and now he's addressing a lady, and this lady is believed to be Sarah Hutchinson, who is the sister of Mary Hutchinson. And who is Mary Hutchinson? That's the wife of William Wordsworth. William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge, as we know, were great friends. They were neighbors in the Lake District. They were very close to each other, the family members too. And it is said that Coleridge had a great liking for Sarah Hutchinson. But then she did not exactly reciprocate his feelings. So you would find a mention of this lady elsewhere too in the poem. So he seems to be talking to her. Oh lady, in this wan and heartless mood, to other thoughts by yonder throstle wood, all this long eve, so balmy and serene, have I been gazing on the western sky. So he says, I have been sitting here in this heartless mood, because you say that I can't put my heart into it. He is so forlorn in this wan, dull, heartless mood, unenthusiastic, heartless, okay, to other thoughts by yonder throstle wood. And so he looks at the throstle wood, that side, yonder, there, sitting here, wherever he is seated now, he can see the throstle wood, and all this long evening, he says, it's such a balmy and a serene evening. I have been sitting here and gazing at the western sky with nothing going on in my mind. And it's a western sky, and its peculiar tint of yellow-green. There is a yellowish green color for this on the western sky. And I have been sitting here for such a long time gazing at it. And still I gaze. And with how blank an eye. So he says, even now that's what I'm doing. I'm looking at the sky. I'm looking at those throstle woods. But unfortunately, my eyes are blank. Nothing really registers. I don't feel anything when I look at what I see. And those thin clouds above in flakes and bars that give away the emotion to the stars. That's a beautiful line actually. So he says he can see the stars there, and he can see the clouds. And the clouds are floating by in flakes and bars. He's talking about the various shapes of the clouds. Some of them are in loose flakes, some of them seem to be long bars, and they are moving. And as they move, they give away their motion to the stars. Now we know that the stars in the sky don't actually move, they stay in one place, they are stationary. But then when the clouds move, when the clouds drift in the wind, we feel that the moon or the stars also move along. So that is why he says, the clouds that give away their motion to the stars. So he can see those clouds, and now he can see those stars that glide behind them or between. Behind them here is the clouds. So sometimes the stars seem to go behind the clouds, sometimes they go in between the clouds. Now sparkling, now bedimmed, but always seen. So sometimes when the clouds move away, the stars sparkle bright. When they are covered by the clouds, they are bedimmed, but they are always seen. So he can see the clouds, he can see the throstle woods, he can see the stars, and beyond that he can also see the moon, yon crescent moon, as fixed as if it grew. Now he compares the sky to a starless, cloudless lake of blue, a blue lake. So the moon stands there as if it grew in its own cloudless, starless lake of blue. And he says, I see them all so excellently fair. I see, not feel how beautiful they are. So he says, I can see all of them. They're all so beautiful. And fair here means beautiful. They all look so beautiful. I can see them. But the tragedy is that I can see but not feel how beautiful they are. A poet should be able to feel. Only then he can write poetry. Seeing, see, all of us can see things, but do all of us write or do all of us paint? It's only the gifted ones, the artists or the painters, who see the same thing that we see, but then their imagination is kindled. But here he says, I can see, but I don't feel their beauty. My heart has turned so numb, so I cannot feel it, he says. Now we are on to stanza 3. He says, my genial spirits fail, and what can these avail to lift the smothering weight from off my breast? So he says, my genial spirits, my happy spirits. Genial is something that is happiness inducing, something that gives you joy. But he says, my genial spirits fail. So what is the point in looking at the clouds and the wood and the stars and the moon? None of these help to lift the smothering weight from off my breast. I am weighed down by burdens of all sorts. But none of these beautiful sights help in lightening or in alleviating the burden. My genial spirits fail. And what can these avail? These are all these things that he saw. To lift the smothering weight. Smothering is something that suffocates you, that weighs you down. So he says, they are not helping me in any way. It were a vain endeavor, though I should gaze forever on the green light that lingers in the west. So he says, there seems to be no point at all. It's a vain endeavor, a wasted effort. Though I should sit here and gaze forever at that green light that lingers in the west, I may not hope from outward forms to win the passion and the life whose fountains are within. So he says, I don't think, no matter how long I sit here and gaze at these beautiful sights, I don't think I am going to come out of this mode of mine, because I am kind of sure that the outward forms cannot bring in the passion and the life whose fountains are within. So he kind of realizes that happiness is not derived from what you see outside, but happiness is something whose fountains are within. It has to well up from within. So without that happening, there is no point in him looking or gazing at these beautiful sights, because they do not make an impact on him. So I may not hope from outward forms to win the passion and the life. Here you can see that Coleridge's attitude is slightly different from the attitude of Wordsworth. Now, Wordsworth believed that the sights that he saw around him could make him happy, they could fill him with joy. Wordsworth just had to get a glimpse of the golden daffodils, and he says that that is a sight that has sustained me for so long. So many years later, even when I lie in some far off city, all dejected and unhappy, all I have to do to regain my composure is to just close my eyes and think of those daffodils. He talks about the rainbow, he talks about the waterfalls, he talks about the forests and the little flowers that bloom on the wayside. Everything makes Wordsworth happy. But here we have Coleridge saying that outward forms cannot make a person happy. Happiness is something that has to come from within. The passion and the life should come from within. Now we are going on to stanza 4. He says, O lady, we receive but what we give, and in our life alone does nature live. Ours is her wedding garment, ours her shroud. And would we aught behold of higher worth than the inanimate cold world allowed to the poor loveless ever anxious crowd? Ah, from the soul itself must issue forth a light, a glory, a fair luminous cloud enveloping the earth, and from the soul itself must there be sent a sweet and potent voice of its own birth, of all sweet sounds the life and element. So now once again he seems to be addressing the lady, and he says, we receive but what we give, and in our life alone does nature live. So he doesn't seem to give undue importance to nature. To Wordsworth, he believed that nature is everything, that nature can make a person happy, nature can sustain a person. So even in the most dejected mood, nature can uplift a person's soul. That is what Wordsworth said. But here, Coleridge says that we receive but what we give, and in our life alone does nature live. Ours is a wedding garment, ours a shroud. That is, nature reflects only what we give to her. Nature in itself doesn't have anything to do to us, or it doesn't have any impact on us. Ours is a wedding garment in the sense that if you are in a happy mood, and if you feel that everything around you is happy, and if you are happy, you feel the flowers bloom for you, the birds chirp for you, the fountains, they sparkle and they bubble for you. You feel all that if you are happy. That is why he says ours is her wedding garment, in the sense that if we are happy, we feel that the earth is also a part of our happiness, and that she is wearing a wedding garment. But if we are sad, we feel that the earth is also unhappy, that she is wearing the shroud. Shroud is the cloth that is wound around a person who is dead, around a dead body. And so, this is in one way, like all of us have this sometimes when a person dies and when it rains. I've heard people saying that, oh God, the sky, the nature herself is crying because he is dead. That you interpret it that way too. Whereas at other times when something good is going to happen and when it rains, I have also heard people saying that God is showering his blessing. So a rain at the beginning is actually a good sign. So it's all the way we look at it. That's what he seems to be saying, Coleridge. He says that ours is her wedding garment, ours is her shroud. And would we aught behold of higher worth than the inanimate cold world allowed to the poor loveless ever anxious crowd? So he says, if we see anything of higher worth than the inanimate cold world, so the world outside is essentially inanimate, it is essentially cold. If you see something of a higher worth, if you feel that that nature is happy, that nature is fulfilling, that nature gives life, that is because from the soul itself, if you should see earth in that in that lens, then that it is something that should come from our heart. From the soul itself must issue forth a light, a glory, a fair luminous cloud. So all this reminds me of the poem Immortality Ode. There again, those who have read the poem must have come across this these very same light, glory and all that, and where Wordsworth says that in childhood, especially when we are infants, when we have just arrived fresh from heaven, from the abode of God, we are engulfed in a light and a glory. And as we progress through life, as we grow up, as we go on to the boyhood and then adulthood and then old age, what happens is this light and the glory slowly begins to fade. So here Coleridge says that this light, this glory, this fair luminous cloud that envelops or covers the earth, maybe he is influenced by what Wordsworth has written in the Immortality Ode. He says if you have to perceive all that, that feeling should come from your soul. Actually, outside There is no light, there is no glory, there is no luminous cloud engulfing the earth. It all emanates from the soul. And from the soul itself must there be sent a sweet and potent voice of its own birth. Of all sweet sounds, the life and element. And he also talks about this voice, a sweet and a potent voice. And where does that voice come from? That too should come from the depths of your heart, the depths of your soul. And it is that sound that is the sweetest sound. It is the sound of the of all sweet sounds, the life and element. So everything that is beautiful, including the light, the glory, the luminous cloud, and this sweet sound, it should all come from within a person, not from without. If you have it inside you, it will reflect on whatever you see outside. If you don't have it in you, you will not find it anywhere outside. So that is stanza 4.